Ministers prepare for the worst-case scenario in case gas prices stay high and more energy companies collapse. Nearly 1.5 million people have been hit by firms going bust. They might now have to pay more for their energy.
We're very unsure who's going to be taking the money next month, who we're going to be paying, who our actual supplier is, and it's very mixed messaging.
BP and Esso closed some of their petrol stations because of a shortage of lorry drivers. Downing Street says people should buy fuel as normal. With the economy under pressure on various fronts, we'll be looking at how the cost of living looks set to rise. Also tonight, the death of Sabina Nessa. One man is arrested and police release this image of another man they're searching for. The mother, the father and the baby who was taken from them in the 1970s because they weren't married. And the World Cup should be played every 2 years rather than every 4, so says Arsenal's former manager, Arsene Wenger.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, Heather Knight's stunning century helps England wrap up their series against New Zealand and make history along the way in Derby.
Good evening. The government is preparing for the worst-case scenario after the collapse of several energy companies due to soaring gas prices. Nearly 1.5 million customers have been hit in the last 2 weeks by firms going bust. And the government is now working with the energy watchdog Ofgem to protect customers if, as feared, more companies go under. Smaller and newer providers have been overwhelmed by a global spike in wholesale gas prices. All affected customers will still receive energy while a new supplier is appointed by Ofgem, but it might be more expensive. Here's Coletta Smith.
As the wholesale gas price goes up, suppliers are going under, and customers have been caught in the middle. 1.5 million people are now in the process of being transferred to a new energy company. Jamie's supplier went bust at the weekend and he tried to switch himself, so he didn't end up paying too much, but it's backfired.
I should be able to take advantage of any offer that's out there on the marketplace at any given moment, not have to wait for my bust supplier to move me to a supplier that Ofgem have put me in contact with.
In 2 weeks' time, you're going to be facing another bill, but you don't know who it's coming from and you don't know how much it's going to be.
We're unsure if we are paying People's Energy next month. We're unsure if we're paying British Gas because they've sent us an email saying that they're going to collect a direct debit from us. So we've set up a new direct debit with Sainsbury's Energy. We're very unsure who's going to be taking the money next month, who we're going to be paying, who our actual supplier is.
Jamie's frustrated he might end up paying more, even for a few months. But the government say they've only got one goal.
Protecting customers, especially vulnerable ones, from price spikes. And the solution to this crisis will be found from the industry and the market, as is already happening. And government, I repeat, will not be bailing out failed energy companies.
Labour says the government have taken their eye off the ball.
Complacent about the crisis in the market, complacent about the impact on families, complacent about the cost of living crisis.
The official advice is to wait to be transferred. If your supplier goes bust, the gas and electricity will keep flowing. Within 2 weeks, you'll be transferred to a new supplier. Right now, most of those transfers are to British Gas. That's the moment where most of us would jump on a price comparison site, but even they are telling customers to sit tight right now. You may be switched to a more expensive tariff, but it shouldn't be higher than the price cap, which is around £100 a month for the average household.
The power to switch energy supplier is in your hands.
With all the warnings of price rises and the number of companies going bust, it's no surprise people are still trying to switch, because it's what we've been told to do for years.
Millions have already switched.
The government are warning that more suppliers will go into administration, but smaller companies say their hands are tied.
And the government is saying, well, we won't move the cap because we're going to protect consumers. But that's naive. It's like being like King Canute on the beach and trying to resist the incoming tide. These are global events, and if we don't react, companies go bust.
A slice of everyone's bill goes into a central pot to fund customer transfers when a company goes bust. But because so many firms have hit the wall, that charge will be going up. So whatever happens to your supplier, we'll all end up paying more to cover this turmoil. Coletta Smith, BBC News.
BP has temporarily closed some of its petrol stations after a shortage of tanker drivers has led to supply issues. The company said it was working hard to solve the short-term problem. Esso also revealed that a small number of its sites have been affected. Downing Street said there was no shortage of fuel and people should continue to buy it as normal. Our correspondent John Kay reports now from Dorset.
Going pump to pump, hunting for fuel in Sherborne tonight. The town's only petrol station was expecting a delivery, but nothing's turned up.
Shocked, really. How am I going to get to work?
My missus is 9 months pregnant. She's literally about to drop, and I could actually get stuck somewhere and not actually be able to get back home.
You've got to get some petrol.
Yeah.
Well, I'm on empty now. I'm running on fumes.
What are you going to do?
Hopefully get home.
He should be okay, because petrol stations a couple of miles away are still open, and national supermarkets are reporting no issues. But across the country, BP and Esso say a small number of businesses have temporarily closed.
8 pumps, all gone.
Paul is waiting for supplies at his forecourt in Coventry.
We should have had a fuel delivery in tomorrow. Now that's cancelled now till Saturday. Are we sure we're going to get it on Saturday? Who knows?
And no fuel means sales in Paul's shop are also drying up.
There's simply not enough drivers available at the moment.
Vincent runs a haulage company in Essex.
Can you get any agency drivers to help out?
No.
He says it's partly the pandemic and staff taking long overdue holidays and other factors.
One of them is foreign drivers going home after Brexit, and historically the youngsters aren't coming through to take these jobs.
The government insists there's no shortage of fuel and says panic buying will only make things worse. John Kay, BBC News, Dorset.
Let's speak now to our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus, who's at Westminster for us. Damien, energy firms going bust, some petrol stations closing. Ministers must be worried.
Well, Rita, I think the issue here is that you have two different problems there, but they are coming together. They have different causes, so the rise in energy prices, the shortage of drivers delivering fuel, but they are pointing to other issues as well. What one minister called today the acute shortage of labour across the economy, feeding into other fears, people's concerns about rising prices and about the availability of goods in the run-up to Christmas. Now, the government feels it has systems in place to deal with energy companies going bust, to bring in more drivers, to deal with some of the labour shortages. But the problem here, I think, is that the opposition parties are finding an idea that they can coalesce around, this idea of the cost of living crisis. And think of what's coming down the line. Just down the line, we have the end of furlough and also the end of that universal credit uplift, £1,000 a year that people have had, which is going to be withdrawn. That's going to feel like a cut to many. I think that's going to make this feel like a difficult winter, not just for those on the receiving end of some of these issues, but perhaps for the government too.
Damien, many thanks. Well, rising energy costs and worker shortages have led the Bank of England to issue a stark warning about inflation. I'm joined now by our economics editor, Faisal Islam. What's the bank saying, Faisal?
Well, you can see it on our forecourts, as we've been reporting, in energy bills, but also in our ports, on our farms and in some of our shopping shelves. And it's a combination of the rebound post-lockdown that we've seen globally with prices going up, but also some UK-specific factors, including the post-Brexit immigration rules. And you put those together, and what the Bank of England have said is that you can see it's not just a series of localised anecdotes, you can see a material impact on the big numbers across the economy, most obviously in the inflation number. Now, we thought that this was going to go pretty high, over 4%, that's double the target that we seek to get in the economy, but that they thought that would come down rapidly, there would be a temporary rise in inflation. Now they're saying there are some reasons why that might persist for longer. And secondly, the Bank of England citing these shortages of both materials and workers in a number of sectors for why internally they've downgraded their predictions of growth. So affecting the recovery from the pandemic, increasing the dilemma for the Bank of England about what to do with interest rates, but also the pressure on government to deal with the issues.
Faisal, thank you. Faisal Islam there. Police have arrested a second man in connection with the death of the primary school teacher Sabina Nessa. The 28-year-old's body was found by a member of the public in a park in southeast London on Saturday. They've also released a CCTV image of another man that they're searching for. A man in his 40s was arrested earlier this week and released under investigation. Lauren Moss reports.
A community in shock at the death of primary school teacher Sabina Nessa. Her body was found just minutes from her home in Kidbrooke.
We believe as she walked through the park, she was approached by an individual and fatally attacked. Sabina's body was sadly found by a member of the public, and we are appealing for anyone who was here on Friday evening and who thinks they saw anything unusual to come forward.
Tonight, police have made an arrest. A 38-year-old man is in custody on suspicion of murder. Detectives have also released CCTV images of a man seen in the area they'd like to speak to and are asking anyone who recognises him or this silver car to contact them. It's understood the 28-year-old left her home on Astle Road around 8:30 p.m. on Friday. She walked through Cater Park heading towards the depot bar. Her body was found near the community centre on Saturday afternoon. Sabina's sister has posted a tribute on social media. She wrote, "My beautiful, talented and caring sister. Never in my life did I, or my sisters, or my mum or dad think this could happen to us." 6 months after the murder of Sarah Everard in Clapham, campaigners say the streets still aren't safe for women.
This is not on women to protect ourselves. We need the perpetrators to be stopped. There's nothing done about harassment level offenses. There's very little done about indecent exposure offenses. People don't just go out and murder right away. There are signs, there are histories, there are reports made ahead of time. There are people that are scared of these men before they perpetrate these crimes.
A post-mortem examination carried out on Sabina was inconclusive. A candlelit vigil will be held in Kidbrooke for her tomorrow night. Lauren Moss, BBC News.
It's a practice that went on for decades, forcing women to give up their babies for adoption because they were unmarried. And now it's to be the subject of an inquiry by a parliamentary committee. It follows a number of reports here on BBC News earlier this year into how women were denied the right to keep their children by doctors, nurses and social workers. The Scottish Government is also looking at the issue. Duncan Kennedy has been talking to 3 members of a separated family about the pain that they've suffered.
This is the family that was never allowed to be a family. Yvonne, the birth mother, Andy, the birth father, and Liz, their daughter, who was taken from them at birth.
Are you going to come and sit and have
Yvonne's story began in 1973 when she became pregnant with Andy's baby, out of wedlock.
You're not married, so therefore you're not keeping the baby, which really hurt me.
You wanted to have the baby?
I wanted to have my child.
But in the 50s, 60s and 70s, thousands of women like Yvonne were pressured by social workers, doctors, nurses and churches into giving up their babies for adoption.
I think this was written.
Yvonne says the nurses took her baby at birth.
I never even got the chance to hold her straight away. I felt cross that I'd just been left like a piece of meat laying on a slab.
Later, Yvonne asked for one final cuddle before her daughter was adopted, but her social worker refused.
I felt that my baby had just been snatched away from me without a final goodbye. Not knowing if I would ever see that child again. Sorry.
Andy, the birth father, says he was never permitted to see Liz, his newborn baby.
I've been told without a doubt that I wasn't going to be allowed into the hospital to see Yvonne or the baby. So there was a huge chunk of her life where she didn't have any relationship with her birth parents, and it was difficult. Yeah.
Ready.
Liz was adopted into a loving family, but says she was always confused by what had happened to her.
Good girl.
What did you come to think of your birth mother? Did you come to resent what she did? Was there any anger?
Yes, I did, because I had no idea why. Why would you give up a baby? I never understood that as a child. I just couldn't understand.
Since the BBC first broadcast the story of forced adoptions, dozens of other people have come forward to tell their stories. And today it was confirmed Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights is to hold an inquiry. It took Yvonne, Andy and Liz 29 years for them to reunite, and they say it's time now for an official apology.
I was literally taken from my birth mother's arms. So I think an apology wouldn't take away the pain, but it would certainly help. Yes.
My middle daughter made a comment to say that they'd be being denied a relationship for so much of their lives.
I will never ever have another child. So I lost the only thing in my life that I ever wanted.
And that was Yvonne Labram ending that report by Duncan Kennedy. Now, the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show that there were 36,710 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means in the past week there was an average of 33,034 new cases per day. There were 7,588 people in hospital with COVID, according to the latest data. Another 182 deaths have been recorded. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test, taking the average number per day in the last week to 143. On vaccinations, 89.6% of people aged 16 or over have had their first jab, while 82.1% are now double vaccinated. The Health Minister for Wales, Labour's Eluned Morgan, has apologised for patients having to wait several hours for emergency care. Welsh hospital A&E units have recorded another set of worst ever performance figures, with nearly 8,000 people waiting more than 12 hours to be seen in August. Here's our Wales correspondent, Howell Griffith.
It's a symptom of a system in crisis. Ambulances queued outside A&E, unable to hand over their patients or reach others in need. Amy knows what that means. 2 weeks ago, she fell from a horse and ruptured her spleen. Unable to move, she waited 9 hours for the paramedics to arrive.
I got very disorientated because I wasn't allowed to move my legs. My legs were really aching, and to be able not to move your legs for 9 hours, it's not very nice at all. The ambulance did get called 11 times and they didn't even send out a first aid person to come and see me.
The ambulance service has apologised, but paramedics like John warn there's often little they can do if they're held outside a hospital, sometimes for an entire 11-hour shift.
I think what we're facing is a lot of frustration, because we're waiting at hospitals and we're hearing the calls on the radio asking for any available crews to respond, and we're just not able to respond, and that is very frustrating, because at the end of the day we're there to provide care, and that's what we want to do.
Waiting times inside A&E are now the worst on record. The 4-hour target has never been hit. The pandemic has worsened what was already a decade-long problem.
And of course I apologise to people within Wales who have been waiting for such a long time, but this is an unprecedented time, and of course we do hope that people will bear with us.
The pressure is coming from every angle. More elderly patients who've become more frail during lockdown, but also younger people whose mental health has suffered and find A&E the only place to turn.
Doctors on the front line here say it feels like winter has already hit and warn even tougher times are ahead.
We could see patients having to wait longer for admission to a bed, and we'll see the hospital becoming more crowded as those admissions go up with patients not just with COVID but also with flu and other sort of respiratory infections.
The ambulance service has now called on the army for help, but few expect an instant cure for the NHS's ails. Howell Griffith, BBC News.
Letters shown to the Grenfell inquiry show successive governments were warned by London Fire Brigade about the potential fire risk of cladding panels up to 8 years before the fire, which claimed 72 lives. The brigade made its first warning after its initial investigation into a fire in Southwark in 2009, when 6 people died. The government's chief fire safety advisor, Sir Ken Knight, replied there was insufficient evidence then to warrant issuing the warning that the brigade wanted. In 2012, several fire safety recommendations for tower blocks were made to the junior minister, Brandon Lewis, but not implemented. Mr Lewis will give evidence at a later date. Tenants are being evicted because of rent arrears built up over the pandemic, despite the government saying that COVID wouldn't leave anyone without a home. 1/3 of eviction hearings monitored in England and Wales over the summer stated COVID as the reason that rent hadn't been paid. The US Special Envoy to Haiti has resigned just 2 months into his job, criticising President Biden's approach to deporting Haitian migrants back to their homeland. It follows pictures appearing to show border police wielding whips and charging at migrants trying to cross the Rio Grande River in Texas. Will Brandt reports now from Mexico.
In the dead of night, immigration agents in northern Mexico drag Haitian families from their hotels as they sleep. Just miles from their destination, they can go no further, no matter how desperate they are. Even if they'd made it, they would have been greeted by scenes like this. As migrants attempted to cross from Mexico to a makeshift camp in Texas this week, they were pushed back by mounted border patrol using whips. Thousands have already been deported back to Haiti, prompting the US Special Envoy to resign in protest. Deportation is these people's worst nightmare. Having travelled from South America to the border town of Mexicali, they gather in a Haitian restaurant for the only meal a day they can afford. Fiteson has lost more than most. His mother died and his father was left badly injured as the family home collapsed in the recent earthquake. Having traversed 11 countries and the dense jungle of the Darien Gap to get here, he says he can't be sent back now.
There is nothing for me in Haiti. Nothing. If they're going to send me back, they may as well just kill me. Just end it all.
The late summer temperatures in Mexicali are brutal, and beyond this border wall lie many miles of inhospitable desert. Yet the Haitians who've arrived here in recent days say they will endure almost anything to avoid the same fate as many of their countrymen, deported from Texas back to a country on its knees. Meanwhile, there's no sign of an end to this crisis. Tens of thousands of Haitians are scattered in scores of Mexican cities, and many thousands more are trapped en route in Colombia. In truth, very few will be let into the US. Migrant rights groups say the Biden administration's policy towards Haitians is exclusionary and racist.
The United States has functioned for hundreds of years as a country that has not welcomed, provided opportunity, or provided justice to black people.
And across Mexico, police continue to intercept buses and raid hotel rooms. Close bilateral cooperation or doing the Americans' dirty work. For the Haitians travelling north, it amounts to the same thing. Will Grant, BBC News, Mexicali.
The former Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger has defended his plans to restructure the international football calendar, including highly controversial plans to have the World Cup played every 2 years instead of every 4. In an interview with the BBC podcast The Sports Desk, Wenger, who's now FIFA's head of global development, told our sports editor Dan Rowan he was ready to gamble to make football better.
It would be the most radical shake-up in the history of football's showpiece event.
FIFA's proposing to hold World Cups twice as often, ripping up decades of tradition. Former Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger is the man spearheading the overhaul and told me the tournament must be more accessible.
Yes, we can organise a World Cup every 2 years because that's where the best play against the best, and that makes everybody better. Out of 211 countries, in the world, 133 have never been at the World Cup.
Why are you meddling with the game's best-loved competition?
The risk is to make football better, and I'm ready to take that gamble.
Currently, clubs can lose their top players to international qualifiers up to 5 times a season. Wenger wants to cut that to just 1 or 2.
Everybody knows it's chaos in the programme. There's no clarity, no simplicity, no modern way to organise a season. What I propose, we not produce more games for the players, a better rest period, less travelling, and more quality competition.
The idea has split the sport. There are fears it could shift the spotlight away from both the women's game and Olympics. The head of UEFA, meanwhile, has threatened a boycott. Only yesterday, European football's governing body condemning the plan. Meanwhile, Premier League clubs have also voiced their concern.
Terrible idea, because I'm a traditionalist and I think scarcity makes things very valuable, and every 4 years feels about right to me.
It's the rarity that makes it special. What would your principal response be to that concern?
I would say the World Cup is such a huge event that I don't think it will diminish the prestige. You want to be the best in the world, and you want to be the best in the world every year.
What about the cost to fans who are desperate to see World Cups and now face double the cost?
I have a huge sympathy for that, of course, and that is factors that have to be analysed.
One of football's most successful ever managers, Wenger insists he'd back the idea if still a coach, rejecting suggestions this is about FIFA wanting more money.
My proposal is purely based on football. I'm not on an ego trip. I've been asked to help to shape the calendar of tomorrow.
Most federations are open to considering a change to the World Cup cycle, and a full consultation's been promised. But with a possible vote in December, football's latest fight is entering a critical phase. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
That's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night. Bye-bye.
Good evening. We've had an unusually warm September so far. There's some more warmth in the forecast over the next few days. And even where it's been quite chilly today across the Northern Isles, these outbreaks of rain moving through overnight will introduce some mild and more humid air by the early part of Friday morning. That humid air introducing lots of cloud across western Scotland, northwest England, Northern Ireland, the odd spot of rain with that. Some clear spells further south, allowing it to get a little bit chilly, but most of us starting tomorrow morning in double digits. For tomorrow, a westerly wind blowing across the UK, quite a strong wind across the northern half of the country, bringing a lot of cloud and some spots of rain. But for eastern Scotland, and certainly for eastern and southern parts of England, parts of Wales as well, we should see some sunshine. The sunniest spots could get to 23 or 24 degrees. As we look ahead to the weekend, there's plenty more dry weather in the forecast. Still quite warm, the increasing chance of showers on Sunday, but next week looks more unsettled and it will turn cooler as well.
A different perspective on the week's news.
The figures are way below what is reality.
Given by correspondents with real insight.
They don't want democracy, they want an Islamic state.
A global view of the biggest stories. Dateline London, tomorrow at 7:30 on the BBC News Channel and on BBC iPlayer.
Political Thinking is the series in which I have conversations with those who shape our political thinking about what has shaped theirs, their backgrounds, their values, their lives beyond politics.
Political Thinking with Nick Robinson, Saturday 8:30 on the BBC News Channel.
I feel unhappy.
The natural world is in crisis
So sad.
because of us.
But a better sustainable future is within reach.
It's within our power if we start making the right choices from today.
Let's crack on.
Find out how we can all make a difference with our planet now across the BBC.